Here are 3 key ingredients that the Dallas Cowboys need to include if they're going to cook up a successful 2025 season. All that next.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Welcome back. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. You can also check me out over on the Locked On Dynasty Football podcast. And that voice you heard to open up the show, just a fantastic cold open. That's Landon McCool. Check him out on Twitter at McCoolBCB. And on today's show, we're going to talk about some best case scenarios, right? Some things that kind of need to happen for the Cowboys to have a successful season, or things that we want to happen. Let's phrase it that way. Mm-hmm. And let's start with the offensive line, because I think that's a pretty clear one. I think, Landon, this Cowboys offensive line has a successful year. They stay healthy, and we see some gradual improvement. That will be a great sign for not only 2025, but their long-term outlook.
Yeah, and honestly, I think, we can kind of glean that just based on their kind of stance on that, right? And how much effort they've put into trying to solve the offensive line position, whether that's, obviously the hiring of Clayton Adams and the kind of restructuring of the coaching staff there, to all the way to the free agents that they brought in, several starter level kind of free agents on the interior. And then obviously the inclusion of Tyler Booker as the draft pick. The Cowboys themselves have clearly, through action, made a statement that improving and solidifying the offensive line was a key factor in making this team better, and to correcting kind of the sins of the past here. And so if they are able to achieve that, and I think the results being, I think we talk about the tackles because I think you feel with all the improvements that have been made and what you've already got in Tyler Smith and Cooper Beebe, that Booker kind of slides into a situation that you feel like is going to have a high floor. What you don't really know about is, an aging Terence Steele and Tyler Guyton, who was, kind of up and down, to be kind at times last year. If they're able to hold up their end of the bargain, and I think what that will look like is, you're not constantly having to help Guyton over there. You're not constantly having to put in a tight end or a running back on his side in pass protection situations, that every once in a while you're throwing a 5-man protection out there. Every once in a while you're seeing him moving guys off the ball. This is early, right? And then as the season that gets better, if you're seeing that, then I think that is one of the markers that could portend the Cowboys having a really successful season this year.
Yeah, if you just told me, like, before the season started, what type of year Tyler Guyton was going to have, I could probably tell you what the Cowboys are going to do, because, it's obviously not all on his shoulders. But if he has an awesome year, I got to believe the Cowboys offense is doing pretty well, because they're pretty set at every other position. So yeah, I think you're right. Like, if the tackles step up and Terence Steele plays the way that we saw him, was it 2022 was the season he got hurt, I believe?
I think that sounds right.
Yeah. Early 2022, if Tyler Guyton lives up to his first round status, Tyler Booker becomes, the player that the Cowboys obviously thought he was going to be when they drafted him at number 12. This should be not only a good unit, this might be the strength of your team. And if you have an offensive line that is the strength of your team and they're dominant, you can win a lot of games just by leaning on those guys.
Yeah, let's even break it down a little bit further on what the optimism would look like for those two guys, right? Like, Guyton had an up and down season. He definitely seemed to have issues with the coaching staff as they were kind of inconsistently starting him. He gets injured. He kind of comes back from the injury. So the thought process with inconsistent play and inconsistent play time, honestly, as well. Mm-hmm. So the thought process being that, with the new coaching staff, a fresh start, it seems like he's rebuilt his body. This is based on what we've heard and what we've seen, and kind of the pictures with him. Obviously, a second year in the NFL is where a lot of these players kind of take their jump. So there's a lot more unknown on the Tyler Guyton side of things but there's also the opportunity for him to be a much better player coming into the season.
And I would say there's tiers of it. Like, I think if Tyler Guyton was able to stay healthy for 16 or 17 games, I think us, you and I, would be at least happy with that because he's able to get over some of the injury concerns. If he ends up becoming not the worst offensive starter on the offensive line, I think that's a win, right? If he becomes an average player, that's a step up. If he becomes a Pro Bowl player, now we're having a different conversation, not only about the Cowboys offensive line, but about their offense in general. Because if you have a Pro Bowl tackle next to a all-pro caliber guard in Tyler Smith, now we're cooking.
Yeah, and all that I think is in play. I mean, he's that type of athlete, that type of prospect. He's playing next to a great offensive guard. He's in a system that hopefully will help accentuate some of his skill set. So that is possible. It's also possible that he's terrible and they got to replace him. So I think it's the wide spectrum at that position specifically is kind of endemic of the situation with the offensive line overall. And then for Steele, his situation is a lot closer together, high floor and ceiling, right?
I agree. Yeah,
I think the truth of the matter is where you have optimism there or hope there that will improve is that the techniques that were used by Solari clearly didn't work well with what Steele likes to do. Duke's talked about him having to kind of throw that outside hand consistently first. It's just not something that Steele was comfortable with, or something that I think he did a lot under Duke's tutelage. So the thought process being, maybe he's doing something that's a little bit more comfortable that can kind of unlock, really what you're looking for. That 2022 is what you talked about, right? It's just not being a liability as a pass protector necessarily. I mean, he actually, I think, only allowed maybe 1 sack that year. But on top of that, being a plus run blocker, I think that's kind of where we need to see. I think I can tolerate him giving up 4 or 5 sacks a season and having some penalties if
add value as a run blocker. Yeah,
exactly. As long as we're getting that add value as a run blocker that we got back in the day, I think that is a much more palatable situation for him at right tackle.
Again, this is a very young offensive line, and everybody's under contract for the foreseeable future. I'm trying to think which offensive lineman has a contract coming up. It's got to be Tyler Smith, right?
Yeah, it's got to be.
But I mean, Tyler Smith is going into year 4, and the Cowboys have the 5th-year option under him as well. So, I mean, the point is that this should be your offensive line starters, not only for this year, but for the next several years. So if they can stay healthy and we see a gradual improvement as the season goes along, like each quarter of the season, that'll be I think if this offensive line can become, a top 10 offensive line and maybe better by the end of the year, even if the win total is a little bit maybe less than what we're hoping, I wouldn't be surprised if we're calling that a successful season because they're putting so many chips into this young offensive line. I think they know it could be a rough start out of the gate.
Added value at the offensive line position is something that will increase the odds of your having a successful season, but will also increase the long-term odds of you continually having successful seasons beyond just 2025.
And I think that was the plan for the Cowboys. Like, hey, let's try to get 4 and hopefully 5 guys that can play together and gel for the next several years. Kind of like the way they did when they had, Tyron Smith, Zach Martin, and Travis Frederick, and those guys played so many years together. They just have had so many different combinations over the last couple of years. Getting those guys all on the field, allowing them to develop that type of chemistry. We'll see how it plays out. Let's talk about Matt Eberflus and what he could potentially do in year 1 as the Dallas Cowboys defensive coordinator. We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by Gametime. There's nothing like the NBA playoffs, the intensity, the buzzer beaters, the fans losing their minds. It's the kind of atmosphere that you must experience live, and this year's matchup is already delivering. If you want in, Gametime makes it fast and easy to get seats, even for the biggest playoff games, and prices on the app actually go down the closer that we get to tip off, and with killer last-minute deals, panoramic seat views, and no surprise fees, Gametime is a total game changer. I love that I can see my seats, the exact view for my seats in the app before you buy. Plus, the app is so ridiculously easy and simple to use. 2 taps and I'm done. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. We're talking about 3 things that we would like to see the Cowboys do this year in order to have a successful season. And let's talk about Matt Eberflus, the Cowboys' new defensive coordinator, because if he can come in and fix this run defense, and I'm not saying make it the number 1 run defense in the NFL, but make it where it's not a weakness, man, that would be just such a massive win for the Cowboys this year.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's something that clearly, as the kind of cycle rears itself back around to a more run game, kind of being a part of the NFL, you're going to see this importance kind of even grow, and the problem that the Cowboys have had over the last few years in stopping the run kind of become even more of a problem. And I think that, Eberflus has the correct idea, and that honestly, like, the first start is to just make it a focus, right? And just to like commit to it, and to understand that a lot of it is a mindset, right? And a lot of it is about being committed to doing what it takes to stop the run, even if it gives you a less opportunity as a pass rusher or a pass defender. I think that that's where you're going to start to see kind of the more immediate improvement, and that kind of finds its way down into techniques, into schematics, right? Like, just not selling it all out to kind of go after the quarterback, including running past the running back who has the ball in his hands. So I think that has been a strategy that was successful for some of these kind of what we used to call cover 2 teams, the Pete Carroll type defenses, that Dan Quinn and Gus Bradley types, that to kind of attack these teams with the mind towards the quarterback and just worry about the run later. And that's just not going to fly as much anymore as defenses have changed and as offenses changed. So I think kind of just making a commitment to being schematically sound versus the run, and then being willing to invest in the personnel that's required. I think that's also been obviously an issue with the Cowboys in the past. Just not like, investing in the big bodies that are required to continually play the run. You started to see that more that they are, right? They started to draft these guys a little bit more. I understand that Toei was a 7th round pick, but I think they like him a little bit more than that. They went back to get the Jay Rogers, who left the team previously, because they wanted his big body back there. And then obviously we'll see exactly. I think another thing that kind of another way you could break this down even further, right, is how is Mozzie Smith playing in Matt Eberflus's defense, right? Because I think that will also pretend just how high of a, I won't say ceiling, but definitely how high a floor that this Eberflus defense could potentially have.
And I think it's going to be hard for Eberflus out of the gate, because his best linebacker, DeMarvion Overshown, going to miss probably the first 3 months of the season. And then on top of that, with no Trevon Diggs, your cornerback situation, at least on the outside with Kyer Elam and whoever else is playing out there, those guys are probably going to need some extra help. Where if you had Diggs and Bland and Jordan Lewis, maybe you wouldn't need to devote so many guys in the secondary. Maybe you could drop one of those safeties down. But it's going to be a challenge. And if he can fix this run defense, and again, just make it an average run defense where you're just not worried about teams running the ball for 6 yards a carry every time they tote it, I think that would be a huge win. And you and I are talking pre-show. Like, I have some serious doubts that Matt Eberflus is ever going to get another head coaching gig because of how poorly things went in Chicago. And everybody read the Seth Wickersham piece on ESPN on some of the problems that went there. He's already behind the 8 ball a little bit because he's a defensive minded head coach, and those guys just don't get hired very often. So if this were to work out and he becomes, a really good defensive coordinator, maybe you can keep him for more than a year or two or more than 3 years, like the Cowboys had Dan Quinn. And this can be your Steve Spagnuolo, who the Chiefs have had now for over a decade, where you just have a plan in place with your defensive coordinator. You run the same scheme, guys get used to playing in it. His success is going to be really important for the long-term outlook of the Cowboys.
Yeah, one of the big issues you see with the kind of maintaining success, maintaining excellence at the in defensive football in the NFL is because these staffs end up, getting hired away. They keep moving away. The teams that are able to kind of long-term sustain defensive success and not fluctuate year to year are the teams that are kind of able to keep the same coaching staff together, relatively the same personnel. That doesn't always guarantee it, but that's the way. If you want to build kind of long-term success at the defensive position, it's not to obviously fluctuate between defensive coordinators every single year.
I look at the 49ers, for example, right? When they had Robert Saleh, really good. Then they went to, I think D'Amico Ryans was there for a year running that. And then they've had some change, and it's just gotten a lot worse. Now Robert Saleh's back. Or look at Philadelphia. Philadelphia lost Jonathan Gannon after the 2022 season. 2023, their defense was a disaster. 2024, they get Vic Fangio, who is one of the more respected defensive coordinators in the league. And it's not surprising. Their defense is way better. So having some stability at that position is a big deal.
Yeah, and kind of going back to the nickel spot real quick, because I do think that that's an interesting angle here, is that I think that's part of the reason you started to see guys like Wanye Thomas and Izzy McCwamu getting snaps at that. And even, someone like Elijah Clark, like we talked about, he's a bigger guy that's playing in that kind of nickel spot, right? So a former safety. So I think part of the problem that the Cowboys had last year, we talk about Mozzie Smith and we talk about the linebackers, and you think that would mean that the run defense specifically was weak in the middle of the defense. The real problem with the Cowboys run defense was on the edges, right? Was teams running. And that doesn't necessarily mean just the defensive ends. That can be the defensive tackles in backside pursuit. That can be the tackles keeping the linebackers free to run to the edge. So I also think that can also include that overhang player, that nickel player. And if you've got a smaller guy out there, sometimes it's harder to play that position. And so maybe what they do early on while they're dealing with the injury situation that you alluded to is that they do play Bland a little bit more on the outside in order to just kind of make sure they have a good guy opposite of Elam. And then they kind of rotate that nickel guy in as needed, depending on the down and distance, to make sure that they still have a physical presence in that spot so that they can defend the run, even in kind of pass formations. So, I think, again, it all goes back to Eberflus's commitment to actually stopping the run schematically and with personnel.
All right, let's discuss the one thing outside of the Cowboys winning the Super Bowl, winning some playoff games, that for me would deem a successful season for Dallas. I'll tell you what it is next. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, check out the Locked On NFL Scouting Show. As training camps get closer and moves are being made, host Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino will make you the most informed NFL fan this offseason. Find Locked On NFL Scouting on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. All right, Landon, last thing I wanted to talk about here. I think we can all define a successful season for the Cowboys in different ways. I think for some people, it would be making the playoffs after not doing it last year. Although I think Cowboy fans are a little bit over just making the playoffs. But I think if they were to win a playoff game or multiple playoff games, I don't think Cowboy fans would be all that bummed out because the expectations are a lot lower this year than in previous years. But one of the things that I think is going to deem to me if this is a successful season is if we come out of the year and you and I are talking in January and we say, we got our guy at head coach, and it's Brian Schottenheimer. And we've seen plenty of coaches have maybe some rough years. I remember Dan Campbell had a couple of really rough years in Detroit, and then he went 9-8 one season, 8-9. They beat Green Bay in week 18, and you just felt like, okay, now we are good to go for the future. I think The Rams obviously thought that with Sean McVay, the 49ers with Kyle Shanahan. If we come out of the season thinking Brian Schottenheimer is the guy, I will call it a successful season.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fair, right? I think you have to have an expectation for what you would like to see in the season. Obviously, the Super Bowl is the stated goal of every team. You've got the Carolina Panthers out there saying that their goal is to win the Super Bowl. Everybody's goal is to win the Super Bowl. But if you're trying to break down, especially when you're looking at a season, in a kind of an autopsy of what's the situation, like you have to kind of get inside your own head and say, well, what was my expectation for this season, right? Like, obviously Super Bowl, like we said, is the stated goal, but what that can't be the bar for whether or not this is a successful season, or you kind of lose it, right? Like, because only one team ever wins it every year. So I think in order to kind of view progress and appreciate progress, which I think is important part of getting to become a Super Bowl team, is understanding when there is progress and then promoting that situation so you can get more and more progress.
Well, look like Washington last year, right?
Yeah,
like Washington did not win the Super Bowl. They did not get to the Super Bowl, but every single Washington fan will tell you it was a successful season because not only did they surpass expectations, not only did they find their quarterback of the future, they also found their head coach. And now I think the Cowboys are in a better situation than what Washington was going into last season. But it's the same thing. Like, if we come out of the year saying, hey, there's no doubts that the Cowboys have their right guy, it's a win.
Well, and it's also tough too, because, and it's actually funny. Someone asked, Schottenheimer this very question, like, is it tough to kind of walk into this situation with the baggage of not winning a Super Bowl in 30 years? And he can't think like that. And really, we can't think like that in the context of trying to figure out what is a successful season, because ultimately, like we'd like to see Dak win more playoff games and win a NFC Championship game and go to the Super Bowl and win a Super Bowl. But if he gets all the way to the NFC Championship game, or let's say he gets to a division game and plays a really good game, and this is a very good young team that's clearly arrowed up, and you feel great about what they're going to look like 2026, is it really disappointing that he wasn't able to get past the divisional round of the playoff again, despite the fact that the long-term outlook of that is kind of a non-step forward in his legacy necessarily? I don't think that that's a fair way to look at it. So I do think it's important to understand, hey, yes, this is a team that hasn't won a game in 30 years, but you don't go and win all that at once, right? Like, you have to find a way to mark improvement along the way. Otherwise, you're going to go crazy trying to just chase perfection in that situation. So I do think it's important to like feel good about where your coach is at the end of the year and feel that you've got the right guy. Because if you're starting over with the coaching search next year, again, we'll talk about like mismatching timelines of where this organization is.
And I'm obviously wins are the most important thing, but wins can sometimes be a little misleading. Like, if they go 12-5, but they just have an awesome, string of injury luck, and they play a bunch of bad teams, but they lose every big game and they lose in round one, we might be coming out of the season thinking the same way we did about Mike McCarthy. Like, okay, hey, this is a good coach, but not a great coach. But I could also see a situation, Landon, playing out where, maybe they have a bunch of injuries and they have to, scratch and crawl to get to 9-8. But it's clear that this team they have a coaching advantage week in and week out. The guys are getting better. They're developing. The backups are coming in and they're not making mental mistakes. And they're just, the talent level's not there, but the coaches are getting them ready. Wins matter, but I think we'll have a pretty good answer once the season is over, how we feel about Brian Schottenheimer.
Yeah, you don't have to sell the idea of context matters to me at all, because I do think exactly this sort of situation with the schedule the way it is. Like, if it plays out like you said, like, let's say this team goes into this brutal schedule that the Cowboys are facing and they face some injury bad luck, right? Let's say they still are able to scrape out a playoff berth season and they go out and they win a game in a playoff game and on the road, right? Like, even if they lost the next year, maybe it's not a step in the overall view of where you are with Dak and the Dallas Cowboys. But it would be hard to look at that situation and not look at it as a resounding success for what Brian Schottenheimer was able to accomplish. If you've got a team that's out there fighting hard through a detrimental injury situation against, some of the better teams in the NFL, which the Cowboys are facing this year, like that's the kind of context that I think is important to pay attention to when evaluating whether this is a good season or not, and whether you're giving Schottenheimer the door or giving Schottenheimer a pat on the back and say, hey, buddy, we can't wait for 2026.
Well, I just know, I know how I felt after the 2003 playoffs. The Cowboys went 10-6 that year. They lost to Carolina, but they had uncertainty at quarterback. The offense wasn't very good, but you felt really good that Bill Parcells was the coach and that he was eventually going to get this thing turned around. And he did. In 2006, the Cowboys found their quarterback in Tony Romo. They got to the playoffs. They went 10-6 that year as well. And that set them up to be successful in the late 2000s and going into the 2010s. I'm hopeful that they can get something similar out of Brian Schottenheimer. I'm sure he won't be big tuna, but you're hoping to get that kind of feeling again.
Yeah, I think that's the thing where you're hoping for the margins that you didn't necessarily know you were going to get with Schottenheimer, is that the moves that he's made in the offseason, like you're starting to kind of silently believe to yourself,
yes,
hey, maybe this guy actually is a really good head coach specifically, because the offensive part is all going to be Dak anyways. Like it's all about Dak and the offense that Dak's bringing from last year, not necessarily Schottenheimer bringing a new offense. So if it's about Schottenheimer being a really good head coach, which I think is possible, this team could be going places.
All right. That's it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen every single day. Check us out on YouTube. Download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. Follow Landon on Twitter at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus_Mosher, and we'll see you right back here tomorrow.